Warframe passive abilities. They all have them, but some are better than others. And today, I'm here to tell you, in my opinion, which ones are the good ones and which ones are the not so good ones. Hey everybody, how's it going? Yes, I am indeed here to make a Warframe passive ranking tier list, whatever you want to call it. I know everyone under the sun has done one, but that doesn't stop me from doing one. At the end of the day, everyone has their own takes, everyone has their own opinions. I've been addicted to Elden Ring Night Rain recently, and I'm about to be addicted to the new 3.26 League for Path of Exile 1 soon, but I decided why not squeeze this cute little video out for you guys. If you like my content and want to see more, hey, that subscribe and like button are there for a reason. Now, before we get started, I do want to make one thing clear. This is my opinion. I'm not the end-all be-all when it comes to Warframe takes, nor is anybody else. Alright, now that that's out of the way, we have the tier list here. I'm using the same one as I used in the scariest and deadliest Warframe ranking video, so that's twice I'm using this. Whoever made this, I appreciate it. Also, I had some comments in that video saying I sounded tired or asleep. That is partially true. I did record that entire video right after I woke up, so that's probably part of it. I will try to sound more lively this video if that helps any. Alright, so first off we have Ashe. Good old Ashe. His passive grants slash procs from Ashe's weapons or abilities deal 25% more damage and last 50% longer, with the 25% damage bonus being additive with other status damage mods like Elementalist mods. So you can think of this passive as a little mini Elementalist mod with a little mini status duration mod added on top of it for slash procs only. Truth be told, I don't really play Ashe like ever, so I don't really know exactly how good this passive is on him. So coming from a non-Ashe player perspective, looking at this passive, it looks kind of mid to me because it's only 25% status damage, whereas Elementalist gives you what, I think it's what, 90, 60, whatever it is. It's a nice bonus to have, but like, will it actually make the difference? Ashe is already probably doing like damage cap with his Blade Storm now, so it doesn't even matter if the slash procs do 25% more damage, does it? And then the duration also, it doesn't really matter if you're already like one-shotting people with them. Like, I don't know. I'll put this in B because I don't have much experience playing Ashe, and the passive just looks mid to me. So, alright, next up we have the Vaporizer of Asteroids, Atlas. So, Atlas kind of has two passives. Let's go over his first passive. His first passive grants him immunity to knockdown while in contact with the ground. Now, this passive is not useless despite what some people might say, simply because of the fact of when you're landslide punching, you're most of the time going to be in contact with the ground. So that gives you knockdown immunity while you're punching people, which is what you should be doing most of the time as Atlas. Like, I used to put Prime Shift Foot on Atlas. I was one of those people. Don't be like me. He is perfectly playable without Prime Shift Footed. Enjoy that 15% strength or 15% range that you get from Cunning Drift or Power Drift. Alright, now moving on to his second passive, Rubble. Now, I'm not going to read like the entire list on the wiki because I would be here for like another 5 minutes, but the basis of it is enemies that you petrify and punch will drop rubble on the ground that gives you up to 1500 armor, and this armor decays at a set rate if you don't gain rubble within, a couple seconds or whatever. Now, health tanking issues aside, 1500 armor is still quite a bit of armor. That's basically a fully stacked health conversion, which is a very strong mod for health tanking. There is an augment that exists called Rubble Heap that basically gives Atlas above 1400 rubble, landslide costs no energy, deals 2 times damage, and travels 2 times faster, which is a crazy bonus to have. But I'm not going to factor in augments in this video because it would be unfair to do so, considering not every passive has an augment. Even so, having 1500 armor and knockdown immunity while on the ground is a pretty good passive, or should I say 2 passives, so I'm going to put this in A tier. Alright, moving on to Banshee, the Mistress of Sound. Banshee's passive basically equips a suppressor on every weapon that she has brought into the mission, including gun blades and weapons on sentinels. everything will be silent. Nothing will be heard. Now, how good this passive is in a general gameplay sense, I think it's pretty dog shit, because who cares if your weapons are silent in an exterminate mission? You're blowing everything up anyway. But it does have one use in the like Banshee stealth speed weapon leveling strategy, or whatever it is. I don't personally do it, but I know that this strategy exists, so it has some use. I'm gonna be quick with this one. I'm gonna put it in C tier because it has a use, so it's not completely useless, but other than that, I don't really see much practical use normally with this passive. Alright, so up next we have Baruuk, and this is the first passive where we run into the situation of the passive being just a core gameplay mechanic of the Warframe. Like, the character wouldn't function well at all if it didn't have this quote-unquote passive. It's a core part of the character's kit. So I don't really know if this is the right way to do this, but with passives like this, I can't really compare it to other passives that are not a core part of the kit, because if you remove Baruuk's passive, he would not function. You wouldn't be able to use his 4. So I think going forward, for any character that has passives that are just core parts of the character's kit, I will put them in a special category. For Baruuk in particular, he has a specific part of his passive that lets me put him in the regular categories. You'll see what I'm talking about really soon. Baruuk's passive is his restraint meter. You can think of it as the opposite of an anger meter. The lower it goes, the angrier he gets. And the angrier he gets, the more deadly he gets. So there are multiple ways to lower the restraint meter. Every attack evaded through elude erodes 1.2% from the meter. Each enemy affected by lull erodes 0.8 from the meter, and each enemy disarmed by desolate hands erodes 1.6% from the meter. Baruuk gets up to 50% damage reduction as the meter goes down to 0, and Baruuk's 4th ability, Serene Storm, constantly increases your restraint. So to keep using it, you have to remain angry. Now, the 50% damage reduction was the part I was talking about earlier. That's what I'm going to be rating, and that's what I'm counting as the passive. Now, as far as the rating goes, I'm going to give it a B because 50% damage reduction isn't nothing, but it's not much when you compare it to Atlas's 1500 armor, which in a vacuum, that gives you already 83% damage reduction. Alright, next up we have Caliban. Caliban's passive basically grants him and his allies within affinity range a mini adaptation effect up to 50%. So if you don't know how adaptation works, you get 5% damage reduction of that specific damage type per hit that you take, up to a cap. The adaptation mod goes up to 90%, Caliban's passive goes up to 50%. It is important to note that adaptation and Caliban's passive do not stack. If you have adaptation equipped on Caliban, then you are effectively losing the effect of his passive on yourself, though your teammates will still, of course, get the effect of the passive. I'm going to put this in B tier along with Baruuk. They are both very similar. They give up to 50% damage reduction, though Caliban's does give it to the entire team. Adaptation as a damage reduction method is not the most reliable thing, so I think that counters out the giving to the whole team part. Alright, and on to the dragon and the man. The dragon man, Chroma. Chroma, I barely know her. Chroma's passive gives him an extra double jump or an extra bullet jump while you're in the air. He also gets these little holographic dragon wings that match your energy color whenever you proc the second bullet jump or the second double jump. How cute is that? I actually had no idea that he gets the extra bullet jump. I thought it was just the extra double jump. You really do learn something new about this game every day you play it. It is important to note, you don't get both an extra double jump and an extra bullet jump. You get one or the other. I'm gonna put this in C because the extra mobility is kind of nice, but I mean, at the end of the day, is anybody really playing Chroma for mobility? You have like a dozen other frames that are better for mobility. Actually, you know what? I just thought of something. I'm putting this in D now because of one simple thing. You can do everything this passive gives you and 10 times more with Operator Dash. Alright, and on to everyone's favorite geode. I'm sorry, Geodude, I'm pretty sure you're not an actual geode. Citrine. Citrine's passive grants her and all allies within 50 meters 5 health per second. This health regen is increased by 0.1 health per second per health orb she picks up to a maximum of 25 health per second. Alright, so in my opinion, this passive is not very good. Well, for starters, on Citrine herself, she can generate literally infinite health orbs. She doesn't need health regen to get her health back. Now, for teammates, let's split it up into health tanks versus shield gate frames. Health tanks don't need the health regeneration from this passive because they usually already have a way to regenerate their own health. And then what about the shield gators? Well, the shield gators are shield gating, so they're probably not going to be taking health damage. They're only going to take health damage if they take a toxin proc, at which case they're probably dead, or they take some sort of modifier in, like, let's say EDA, where like knife step syndrome will just pierce your shields. That is the only place where I see this passive being useful. And well, having such a limited use, I think putting it in C makes sense. Alright, on to Warframe's resident horse girl, Dagath. Dagath's passive gives a 35% chance for health orbs and energy orbs to increase their effective yield by 300%. So if you're like me, you hate conditional / chance based buffs like this. I would much rather the increased effectiveness be a lower value, but proc 100% of the time. That being said, this is still a pretty decent source of energy economy, and it's her passive, so it's literally free. I don't really notice it when I play Dagath, but that's probably mostly because I run Equilibrium on her. Even though Equilibrium doesn't stack with her passive, I just love Equilibrium so much, and I can't help but put it on like basically every frame. You could probably slap some increased effectiveness of Energy Orb Archon shards on her, and this passive will probably carry your energy economy alone. I'm between A or B on this one. I think I'm gonna go B because of that chance aspect. If you're relying on this to supply your energy, it's chance based, so just by the fact of being chance based, it's not reliable. You kind of have to combine this with multiple other sources of energy economy to have a good, well, energy economy. Up next we have Dante, the warframe everyone wants to see their teammate play as when they're in Deep or Temporal Archimedia. It's no secret that this guy is very overpowered. But how overpowered is his passive? I actually had no clue what his passive was before I made this video. So Dante's passive scans enemies killed by Noctua into the codex, and then enemies with completed codex entries will have 50% extra status chance against them from Dante's weapons. I worded that weirdly, but you get the point. I mean, 50% status chance as the only like gameplay altering part of his passive is okay, but I don't think that's really as good as a lot of other passives. I think if you combine the 50% status chance and the convenience of just scanning people into the codex, that'll land Dante's passive in B tier. Alright, up next we have Ember. Ember's passive grants 5% ability strength per enemy within affinity range affected by a heat status effect. And I don't think there's a cap. At least the wiki doesn't say there's a cap. So this passive gives up to infinite ability strength. So that's instant S tier. I am of course joking. The main thing with ability strength on Ember and Ember's kit as a whole is I don't find her actual abilities to do that much damage. You kind of have to like do a little song and dance, do a little jig in order to get her abilities to kill on their own. And then enemies that have overguard, good luck. So what this passive effectively does is it kind of ramps. Your first cast will be weaker than your second cast, which will be weaker than your third cast, ideally, if you get like enemies just, you know, coming in and then getting burnt. I think on paper this passive looks really good, but the actual performance of it is not as good as it looks, at least when it comes to Ember. I'm gonna put it in B. If this passive was on someone else who really benefited from strength, it would be way higher, like A or S, but being on Ember, I think B makes sense. And, I mean, it's still free strength at the end of the day. Alright, up next we have Equinox. Equinox's passive is a mini equilibrium effect. And when I say mini, I mean really mini. It is 10% compared to Equilibrium's 110%. It is 9% of an Equilibrium mod. It is half of a non-Tau Forged purple Archon shard. She might as well not even have a passive. So, when you pick up a health orb, you get a whopping 5 energy. Woohoo! 5 energy. I'm gonna quit my job. 5 energy? Are you kidding me? I've never seen such power. Yeah, no, this passive sucks. I hate this passive. It's going in D tier. Up next is Excalibur and Excalibur Umbra. I'm combining both of them together. Excalibur has been studying the blade, so his passive grants him 10% attack speed and 10% bonus damage for melee attacks with swords, dual swords, nakanas, rapiers, and exalted blade. 10% attack speed isn't the greatest, but it's at least a little bit something. It's a little tiddlywink of power. 10% damage, that might as well not be on there at all. That 10% damage is equal to roughly 8% of the regular pressure point mod. Alright, and moving on to Umbra's passive, this one is a little bit more complicated. Actually, it's a lot more complicated. So when you're playing Umbra and you turn into Operator, Umbra will gain sentience and he will like shoot enemies while you're like playing as the Operator. It's essentially the Wukong clone, but you have to be an Operator for it to be active. Now, I can see this passive being useful if you're playing like a Necromanc mission or a mission that you're going to be spending a lot of time in your Operator. Your Umbra will just be there like doing DPS for you. But outside of those situations, it's kind of useless because normally I'm going into my Operator for like, 2 seconds and then coming right back out. If this was just Excalibur's passive with the 10% attack speed and damage, this would definitely be D tier, but since I'm counting both of the passives, I'll put this in C tier. Up next we have Frost. Frost's passive grants 100% increased cold status effect duration for Frost abilities. Frost also gains 50 armor for every enemy affected by a cold status effect within affinity range. So the 100% increase cold status effect duration, I find that to be largely useless because if you're freezing a guy, the base duration of the freeze is already enough. It only takes like 0.1 second to kill the average enemy in this game, so like why do you need 100% increased duration for freeze? But I guess it's cool if you want to just like freeze everyone and then just go make a sandwich or take a piss. The armor part of the passive is basically the inverse of Ember's passive, but I think it's actually worse. Here's the thing. If you're freezing people, they can't shoot you. Why do you need that armor if they can't shoot you? Now, you can make the argument for Eximuses aren't completely frozen, so they can still shoot you. That's why you need the armor. But if the Eximus is shooting at you, I don't think the extra armor you get from the passive is going to matter. There's also his Overguard augment that gets better with higher armor, but we're not counting augments, remember? I think this passive belongs in C tier. Alright, up next we have Gara, the Glass Warrior. Gara's passive is, when casting an ability, there is a 15% chance to blind enemies within 12 meters for 10 seconds, exposing them to melee finisher attacks. The blind chance is increased by 20% until the blind triggers. This blind goes through Overguard and Nullifier bubbles, but must be within line of sight. So this is another one of those chance-based passives, but it actually makes sense being chance-based here because having a 100% chance to blind enemies on ability cast would be kind of overpowered. And it has that 20% increased chance when you don't trigger the blind, so it has, some more consistency to it. I've not actually played Gara for like at least 5 years now, and I'm pretty sure she had a completely different passive the last time I played her, so I've not really gotten to experience using the passive in this form. I'm not sure if just spamming Shattered Lash as a playstyle is still viable after the pseudo exalt changes, but if it is, then blind gives an 8 times damage multiplier to melee, so I'm gonna play it safe and put it in B because I don't know if the passive is actually good or not. If you're a Gara main, let me know if B sounds good. Up next is Garuda, and oh boy, I've been looking forward to this one. So according to the wiki, Garuda has 3 passives, but you only really need to count one because that one is so ridiculously good that it just overshadows the other 2, if you can even call the other 2 passives. But anyway, the first passive is Garuda gets 5% increased damage per kill up to 100%. Now, this sounds pretty good. This sounds pretty cool, 100% increased damage, but then you realize it's multiplicative. It is the same thing as a roar or a faction mod. That is incredibly powerful. You basically, at all times, have a 100% roar as a passive. That is insane. I don't even need to tell you what the other 2 passives are to put her in S tier. You know what? I'm not even going to tell you what the other 2 passives are. She's S tier. You remember back on Baruuk when I said that some frames have passive abilities that's just a core part of their kit and not actually a passive? Well, Gauss's passive is that. Gauss's passive is his battery meter. If you remove the battery, Gauss doesn't exist. As opposed to if you remove, let's say for example, Caliban's passive, he still exists. The rest of his kit still works. That's why I'm not counting Gauss as a passive, and that's why I'm putting Gauss in the quote-unquote passive category. Hey, it's me from the future here. So after I recorded footage for Gauss, I actually realized he does have a passive, which is the shield recharge and recharge delay thing based off of his battery. I'm gonna move him to C tier though, because I don't think the shield recharge is that useful on him, considering he's basically immune to damage, and the damage that he's not immune to, well, that'll go through his shields anyway. So yeah, not too useful. You'll see him moved into B tier at the end of the video, but until then, you'll see him still in the quote-unquote passive tier. Up next is our big boy Grendel. Grendel gets 250 armor per guy in his belly, up to 5 guys. Damn, Grendel must be rich if he can afford 5 guys. So I'm gonna compare this to Atlas's passive. Atlas gets up to 1500 armor, so 250 more, and he gets a prime sure-footed for free just for being on the ground. Definitely a tier below Atlas, so it's gonna have to be B. But is 1250 armor as good as the rest of the B tier passives? I'd say so. Up next is Gyre. Gyre's passive grants her abilities 10% flat crit chance against an enemy per active electricity status effect on them, with a critical damage multiplier of 2. This critical chance stacks additively with Cathode Grace's increased critical chance, up to a maximum of 300%. I think there's 2 important things to note here. The fact that it stacks with Cathode Grace and they're both capped at 300% means the passive only really exists to fill out the rest of the crit chance you don't have from Cathode Grace. So for example, my Gyre build right now at max mult augmented stacks has Cathode Grace giving me 194% crit chance. So the most the passive can give me is another 106 because the cap is 300. This goes into my second point. It is 10% increased critical chance per electricity status on the enemy. So that means I would have to stack up 10 electricity stacks on the enemy to get the max 300% critical strike chance bonus. Which means that only subsequent hits after the first from your 4th ability will have that critical chance bonus from the passive. Unless of course you're priming the enemy with electricity from a weapon or one of your other abilities beforehand, but that kind of slows you down, so yeah. I'm gonna put this in B because it is not a bad passive at all, but it is not the most reliable passive. Up next is Harrow. Harrow's passive grants him a maximum of 2400 overshields as opposed to everyone else's 1200 maximum overshields. And he also spawns it into missions with 100% of his energy filled. So the extra 1200 overshields doesn't really matter other than for getting more duration on his 2. Like defense wise in actual content, that extra 1200 overshield is going to get mulched just as fast as the first 1200. The spawning in with 100% of your energy is pretty cool. That's more than 2 Talforge yellow shards if we're equating it to shards, so that's pretty good. Though if you're using Thurible on Harrow, he barely has any energy problems, if any. But it does help with that initial cast of Thurible, so it's not completely useless. I think I'm putting Harrow's passive in C because it has very limited practical uses, even though they seem like they're pretty good bonuses. Up next we have Muscle Mommy Hildryn. Hildryn's passive grants her a 3.5 second full shield gate, which is 1 second longer than the longest shield gate of every other Warframe. She also gains immunity to damage that bypasses shields as long as she has overshields. For a passive, the extra 1 second of shield gate immunity is not bad considering how powerful shield gate already is. That 1 second gives you a lot more leeway to get a pillage off and then restore all of your shields. So it is definitely a welcome bonus to have. Now the toxin prot protection part I feel is a little bit iffy. I mean, you're always going to be spamming pillage, so you're probably always going to have overshields, but there's still the chance that you won't have an overshield and you don't realize it, and then you get toxin prot and then you're dead. So it's not 100% foolproof. You know, I can't be affected by toxin procs. You still have to have that overshield, which brings it down a little bit, but it's still nice to have it in combination with the, you know, plus 1 second shield gate. I think it wouldn't be wrong putting this passive in A tier. I think it's a good enough passive to deserve the A tier spot. Alright, up next we have Hydroid. Hydroid's passive is enemies damaged by Hydroid are permanently more vulnerable to corrosive status, with the initial status reducing armor by 50% rather than 26%, allowing corrosive status to reach 100% armor reduction at full stacks. I think this passive is really good, not only because you can get 100% armor strip from corrosive alone, but because it increases the initial corrosive status from 26 to 50, effectively doubling the effectiveness of the first corrosive stack. And all this being his passive, I'd say is pretty strong and deserving of the A tier. Alright, so we got Inaros up next. Inaros has two passives. His first passive is, upon dying, he will enter the bleed out state and he will entomb himself into a sarcophagus and incarnate a sand version of himself. And he can revive himself by melee attacking enemies and siphoning their life force. The revive meter is filled by every melee hit from the sand incarnation form, and attacks by swarm cravats spawned by Scarab Swarm also contribute to the revive meter. His other passive is killing enemies with melee finishers restores 20% of Inaros' maximum health. So I feel like the first passive, in my opinion, is kind of shit because like just don't die in the first place, forehead. But in all seriousness, a passive that only activates when you die is not a good passive. You shouldn't really be dying in the first place. Now that might sound elitist of me, but I mean, it's pretty hard to die in this game, I'm gonna be honest. Unless you're playing level cap, but like, I'd wager to say most people are not playing level cap. Still, on the chance that you do die, I don't play Inaros, so I don't know how useful it is for getting yourself back up, but I'd imagine it's useful for getting yourself back up. So there's that. The other passive, the restore 20% health on melee finisher. I mean, that's pretty useful to get your health back, I guess. I'm gonna put it in C because I don't really find both passives. I mean, the restore health is fine. That's probably why it's C. But if it was just the revive thing, it would be in D. Up next, we have Ivara. Ivara's passive is she gets a innate 50 meter enemy radar instead of the normal 30 meter that everyone else gets. Now, I don't know about you, but this passive screams C tier at best to me. It's not completely useless, but it doesn't really do that much. Like, is 20 meter more of enemy radar really gonna help you that much? Now, if it was 50 meters of loot radar as well as enemy radar, now we're talking. But just enemy radar, it's going in C tier. Up next we have Khora. Khora's passive is Venari. Yes, I am not joking. Her passive is literally the cat. Oh, and she gets a 15% speed boost while the cat is alive. I dare say this is S just because of how powerful cats are. Having an entire cat as her passive is incredibly strong. Not even mentioning her third ability, which has the attack, protect, heal thing, which is basically the cat's abilities. But that's technically not the passive, so. Up next is my boy, the king of triple exclamation point red crits, Kullervo. Kullervo's passive grants him 75% heavy attack efficiency and 100% increased heavy attack wind-up speed for melee weapons. I like this passive a lot because, I mean, Kullervo is the heavy attack guy. 100% increased wind-up speed is never a bad thing to have, and then the 75% heavy attack efficiency just allows you to put on galvanized reflex, call it a day, and just start heavy attacking, slamming, whatever you want to do. This is an easy A tier for me. It's not S because it's not absolutely outstanding, but it is a very good passive. Up next we have the Viper, Randy. Up next we have the Alchemist, Lavos. Lavos' passive cleanses him of all negative status effects and grants him 10 seconds of status immunity upon picking up an energy or universal orb, with an orb pickup cooldown of 5 seconds. So with how easy orbs are to generate in general and how easy Lavos can turn them into universal orbs, this passive will be on 24/7. So you'll basically just have perma status effect immunity, which is pretty strong for a passive. What this will end up being for most people is freeing up the prime sure-footed slot, but being immune to the rest of the status effects in the game is not a bad bonus either. So I think this lands in a very good A tier position. Up next we have Limbo. Limbo's passive allows him to go in and out of the rift at will by using the dodge maneuver. This also leaves behind a portal for enemies or allies to enter themselves into the rift. In addition, any enemy killed inside of the rift will grant 10 energy to Limbo. I mean, I feel like this is almost quote-unquote passive territory, even though it's not, because, I mean, he should be able to do this anyway without it being his passive. It should just be a part of his kit. I mean, I don't really play Limbo. I never really have. He's one of the few Warframes who I've never really ever made a build for. So I'm not really familiar with any of the intricacies of his kit, but looking from a non-Limbo player's perspective, it seems like entering and exiting the rift at will is a good thing to have. I don't think you're using his passive to put enemies in the rift, and most allies that get put in the rift are just annoyed and want to leave it immediately, so not really any value gained there. I'm gonna play it safe again and put it in B tier. Up next is Loki. Oh boy, Loki. Loki's passive is wall latch duration is increased to a maximum of 60 seconds, 10 times longer than any other warframe. I have one question. Who in the absolute hell is wall latching for 60 seconds in warframe in 2025? I don't even think you wall latch for that long on Araxia. You probably move after like 10 seconds. And you might say, oh, the one use for this passive is to complete the wall latch ribbon challenge. Just equip a mod. This passive is absolutely terrible. D tier. Up next we have Mag. Mag's passive is automatically vacuums pickups that are within 8 meters towards her. This passive does not stack with mods like Vacuum or Fetch. I want you to name one person that is not running Vacuum or Fetch. Mag doesn't have a passive. If there was an F tier, I would put this in F tier, but alas, there's a D tier, so it's going in it. Up next is the Cowgirl, Mesa. Mesa's passive grants her 15% increased fire rate with dual-wielded sidearms, 25% reload speed for one-handed sidearms, and plus 50 health when no melee weapon is equipped. 15% fire rate and 25% reload speed for specific weapon types is such a tiddlywink of power. I find the 25% reload speed to be largely useless, and the 15% fire rate does count for regulators, I'm pretty sure, so that's just like another small fire rate boost on top of the insane fire rate boost you probably already have on her. And then the 50 health with no melee weapon equipped, that might as well not even be there. One, I always have a melee weapon equipped because Kratos is god tier. And two, Mesa does not benefit from health at all. I'm gonna put this in C tier because all it really does is give 15% fire rate to regulators, and I'm not even sure it really even does that. Alright, up next we have Mirage. So Mirage gets 85% longer slides and 50% faster maneuver speed. What, are we playing Apex? 85% longer slides? I don't remember a time where I've ever hit a slide longer than 0.5 seconds. Now, the second part of the passive, 50% faster maneuver speed, that's really vague. I've done some testing. It does not affect bullet jump at all. It seems to only affect the dodge roll. It makes the dodge roll actually like significantly faster and like make it go farther. It really helps if you're like me and always do the little bullet jump, double jump, dodge thing to get around. Because if you're just spamming that, then the extra dodge speed actually like makes you move so much faster. And I'm a Kratos user, so I love any amount of speed you can get. I think the 85% slide duration is useless, but the 50% increased dodge speed is actually like really good, so I'm gonna put it in B tier. Alright, next up we have the Master of Death, Nekros. Nekros and his companions regenerate 5 health when an enemy dies within 10 meters of him. Wait, I'm sorry. That's his That's his passive? Oh my god. Okay, this has got to be the worst passive in the game. This is worse than Mag's passive, and Mag's passive is literally worthless. Let me put this into perspective. You're playing Nekros. You have Desecrate on. Enemies die, and you desecrate them, and they drop health orbs. In what dimension is 5 health on kill within 10 meters gonna help in the absolute slightest? I'm gonna rename D tier to F tier and put this passive in there because that's how bad these passives are. Alright, up next is everyone's favorite femboy, Nezha. So Nezha's passive is he slides 60% faster and goes 35% farther. Now, this passive is taking the slide part of Mirage's passive and putting it into overdrive. Like, if you actually slide as him, the passive is actually pretty noticeable, but in my opinion, it's really annoying because it gives you that, like, sliding on ice effect where it keeps your momentum even when you let go of the movement key. I know you can put on the augment to get rid of it, but I don't really feel like wasting a mod slot to get rid of a passive. I'm gonna put this in C because it is kind of fun to slide around at first, but it gets really old and annoying, so yeah. Alright, on to the next warframe, Nidus. If Nidus is killed with at least 15 stacks of mutation, those 15 stacks are consumed. This grants 5 seconds of invulnerability and restores health to 50%. So I'm gonna say the same thing I said for Inaros. A passive that is only active when you die, when you shouldn't be dying in the first place, is a bad passive. But still, if you end up dying, it's some protection at the cost of some stacks, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. I'm not gonna dwell too long on this. I'm gonna put it in C tier, same thing as Inaros, because it's basically the same thing as Inaros' passive, but like slightly different. Alright, up next we have Nova. Nova's passive is enemies killed by Nova while slowed have a 15% chance to drop a health orb. Enemies killed while sped up have a 15% chance to drop an energy orb. The slow/speed up can be from any source, including Nova's molecular prime. Generating orbs as a passive isn't bad at all. I just kind of wish the two were reversed. So you would generate health orbs when they're sped up instead. Mainly because I play more missions that require the speed up rather than the slowdown. And health orbs are a lot better than energy orbs because equilibrium exists. But all in all, not a bad passive. More orbs is more orbs. I think this is a solid B tier. Alright, next warframe on the list is Nyx. Nyx's passive grants her 40% increased primary and secondary critical chance per enemy afflicted with confusion, up to 200%, with confusion being either from the radiation status effect or from mind control. This critical chance is not flat, it works just like a mod would. So I'd say right off the bat, this is a fairly strong passive. 200% crit chance is quite a bit of crit chance. I mean, it is quite literally another critical delay on your weapon, minus the fire rate debuff. And it's for primaries and secondaries. And all you have to do to keep all 5 stacks of the buff up is just press 3. The only weakness of this passive is when you have less than 5 enemies within affinity range, but that basically never happens. So I think this is an easy S tier. There are very little passives that are as good as this one. Alright, up next is Oberon. Oberon's passive grants all companions 25% health, shield, and armor links, and Oberon's own companion receives 1 instant revive per mission. So links for companions are very situational. It really depends on the stats of your warframe. But at the very least, this passive provides just a little tiddlywink of survivability for your companions. And I'm pretty sure it affects all companions, not just yours. I'm going to put this in C tier. For what it's worth, I think it does something, but I don't really think it's going to make that much of an impact. Alright, up next we have Octavia. Octavia's passive is, when casting an ability, Octavia grants herself and allies within 15 meters the inspiration buff, granting 1 energy per second for 30 seconds. Recasting any ability will refresh the inspiration buff's duration. So 1 energy per second is almost double of an energy siphon, but at the same time, 1 energy per second is not really going to make the difference when energy generation is so easy nowadays. Like, I'm not going to be hooting and hollering, screaming at the top of my lungs because an Octavia is giving me the inspiration buff. Still, as a baseline, giving your entire team 1 energy per second isn't terrible, but you can also do that with Zenuric, and Zenuric is 5 energy per second, so, you know. I'm going to put this in C tier because it has some use, but I think it's definitely an outdated passive for sure. Alright, up next is Protea. Protea's passive is pretty simple. Every 4th ability you cast will have 100% increased power strength. This is definitely a strong passive, but if you want to maximize it, it introduces the element of constantly watching your ability use and lining up the 4th with the one that you want to buff. So let's say for example you have Roar on her and you want to have the 100% strength on Roar every time. You have to kind of do a little bit of a song and dance to get the 100% buff to line up with every time you cast the Roar, and that's kind of annoying to do while playing, in my opinion. So I feel like this is definitely an A tier passive. It is strong, but not the strongest. Alright, up next we have the walking nuclear reactor, Corvex. Corvex's passive grants all primary, secondary, and glaives and gun blades wielded by Corvex to gain +3 punch through. +3 punch through is quite strong, especially for beam weapons that gain additional chains based off of the punch through. But I feel like most of the time it's kind of like the Bane mod situation. I'm not going to remember that I have this passive when I'm playing Corvex. Like, I'm not going to remember, oh, I'm playing Corvex, better take off my punch through mod. Nor do I even want to bother switching my weapon build just because I'm playing Corvex. I think this one will fit into B tier perfectly. Up next is Revenant, the noob frame. When Revenant's shield is fully depleted, he emits a radial pulse over 7.5 meters, inflicting 100 blast damage with a maximum 75% damage fall off. Additionally, harnessing the essence of Eidolons, Revenant is immune to the magnetic waters of the plains of Eidolon. Okay, first of all, Revenant's shield doesn't matter, he has Mesmer skin. Second, who the hell cares about the magnetic waters of the plains of Eidolon? Points made, F tier. Next warframe on the list is Rhino. Oh boy, here we go. Here's Rhino's passive. If Rhino falls far enough to incur a hard landing, a ground impact... I can't read because of how bad this passive is. The ground impact will discharge a shockwave that deals impact damage and knockdown in a 6-meter area effect. I'm pretty sure this is the same thing as the heavy impact mod, which is completely useless. The heavy impact mod does 300 impact damage on the shockwave. You would deal more damage than that by hugging them. I'm not wasting any more time. This is F tier. Moving on. Alright, up next is Citrine. Citrine's passive is status effects inflicted by Citrine's weapons and abilities last 25% longer. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really notice what Citrine's passive was until I made this video. I feel like status duration is such a niche stat, and the base status durations of like basically all of the status effects is good enough already. You don't really need the 25% more status duration. The only situation where status duration would be actually useful is if you're doing stuff like Harmony. But it's such a small and niche bonus that I don't feel like the 25% is worth anything more than a C tier. I also just realized that I skipped Jade, Kume, and Cyto 9 and eventually Temple because I'm going off of the passive ability page on the Warframe wiki and they don't have their passives of those frames on there. So I'm gonna do those 4 at the end after Zephyr. Up next is Sevagoth. On death, become Sevagoth's shadow and fight to resurrect him by collecting the souls needed to rebuild his tombstone. Alright, you can probably already guess what I'm gonna say here. I'm not even gonna say it. It's going in C tier along with the other 2. Up next we have Styanax. Styanax's weapon critical chance bonus increases by 1% per 40 shield points based on his current total, including overshields. This bonus is doubled on spear guns and it works just like a crit mod. So, if I did my math correctly, you would need 8,000 shields in order to equal Nyx's passive crit chance. 8,000. There is no dimension where Styanax is reaching 8,000 shields. I'm sorry. That is not to say the passive is useless, because I currently have 2590 shields on Styanax, plus 1200 overshields equals 3790. 3790 shields equals 94% crit chance, which is less than half of Nyx or Ureli's passive. And it is based off your current shields, so if you lose your shields, you don't have that crit chance buff anymore. I've got to say, this is not the strongest passive, but it is not the weakest passive, so it fits right in on the B tier. Up next is Titania. Titania's passive grants her 25% bullet jump and rolling distance, and casting her abilities rejuvenates Titania and her allies within 15 meters, 4 health per second for 20 seconds. Wow, I did not realize how bad Titania's passive was. 25% bullet jump and rolling distance on a warframe that spends 99% of the time in Arcwing form. Such a useful bonus. And then 4 health per second compared to Citrine's up to 25 health per second. And I put that passive in C tier. I think I'm gonna have to put this in F tier. This passive is completely useless. Next warframe on the list is Trinity. Trinity and her allies in affinity range gain Life Giver, which increases their health equal to 50% of Trinity's total energy pool. Okay, here's the thing about health. Health is really only useful on health tanks, and you need a lot of health on health tanks. Health tanks are either going to be running triple Umbral mods, or they're going to be running Arcane Blessing. Triple Umbral gives HP based off of the base HP of the frame. You usually run Triple Umbral on frames with high base health and armor. For example, if I run Triple Umbral on Inaros, I get 6,762 health. The extra 300 from Trinity's passive is not going to make a difference. On the other hand, Arcane Blessing health tanks. Arcane Blessing gives 1200 health at max stacks. The extra 300 health from Trinity's passive is only equal to a fourth of Arcane Blessing, which is also not going to make a difference. My point is, health tanks are already going to have sources of health. They're not really going to notice the 300 health that Trinity's passive gives them. And while I think 300 extra health for a newbie in Star Chart is going to help them survive, that really doesn't do anything in actual content. So I'm going to put this in C tier. Up next we have Valkyr, the latest center of drama for the Warframe community. Valkyr's passive grants her 50% increased knockdown recovery speed and immunity to hard landings. So 50% increased knockdown recovery speed is useless when you realize Hysteria gives you immunity to status effects. And the immunity to hard landings thing, that's such a niche bonus when you can do that just by sliding before your feet touch the ground. I think I'm gonna have to put this in F tier. Next warframe on the list is Vauban. Vauban's passive grants him 25% extra damage with weapons and abilities against enemies that are incapacitated by a Tesla Nervos, entangled by Mind Layer's tether coil, lifted by Bastile's prison, or pulled by Bastile's vortex gravity. Even though the damage bonus is low at 25%, it is a multiplicative damage bonus, making it fairly powerful. And it applies to abilities as well. When you compare this to Garuda's 100%, this is literally a fourth of that, so definitely not as good as Garuda's. And Vauban's damage scales with enemy level anyways, so it doesn't really matter if you have that 25% more damage. I'm gonna put this in B tier because 25% multiplicative damage is still pretty good. Up next we have Volt. Volt's passive is traveling along the ground between Volt's attacks by running, walking, or sliding will build up static energy, adding bonus electricity damage towards Volt's next weapon attack or ability cast. For every 1 meter moved, 10 points of electricity damage are added, accumulating up to a maximum of 1000 bonus damage. This damage does not combine with elements, is not affected by damage mods, is affected by critical hits and combo counter of snipers, is not affected by multi-shot and will only affect a single hit, and does not affect helmet abilities or shocking speed sparks. Okay, so there's multiple problems with this passive. First, if you're using a full auto weapon, you will never gain any semblance of damage from this passive because it will never really activate. Second, it only gains charge when you're on the ground, not when you're in the air, so whenever you're bullet jumping, you don't gain any charge. Third, it has a cap of 1000 damage, which is quite low, and combined with the limited scalability of the damage, I don't think it'll make a difference even if you stack it up to 1000. The most I can see is stacking up 1000 and then popping your ult, but I doubt that's gonna do anything for the damage. The absolute highest I can rank this is C tier. Up next we have Varuna, the Furry Frame. Varuna has 4 passive effects to choose from, chosen by holding down the corresponding ability button. The first passive is 50% increased parkour velocity. The second one grants complete immunity to status effects. The third one grants 100% heavy attack efficiency. And the fourth one grants a free life when Varuna takes lethal damage, rendering her invulnerable for 3 seconds and restoring her shields and health, with a 60-second cooldown on this effect. And of course, you can only have one effect active at a time. I think the first 3 options are really good, and well, you know what I think about the fourth one. I think this barely breaches into S tier for me because you have the choice between status effect immunity, which is Lavos' passive, 100% increased heavy attack efficiency, which is basically Kullervo's passive, or 50% increased parkour velocity, which is just a nice bonus to have because I love movement. And having the choice between those 3 and being able to switch between them at will is what puts this into S for me. Up next is Wisp. Wisp's passive allows her to gain invisibility while she is airborne. This also grants her companions invisibility as well. This invisibility is removed, however, if you fire a weapon, even if it is suppressed. Melee weapon attacks will not break the invisibility. I think this is a strong passive on an already extremely strong Warframe. I'm gonna put this in A tier because if you're firing a full auto weapon while you're airborne, you're basically never invisible, which also has a side effect of not working with Arcane Crepuscular. Also, the fact that it only works when you're airborne means you have to aim glide all the time, which is kind of annoying. Alright, up next is Wukong. Wukong's passive is he basically gets to cheat death 3 times, and every time he cheats death, he gains 1 of 5 random bonuses. I don't think this is any better than the other cheat death passives, so I'm just going to put it along with the other ones in C tier. Up next is Zaku. Zaku has a 25% chance to dodge attacks and a 25% damage reduction against area of effect damage. Both of these bonuses are increased to 75% while their ult is active. So I think the thing about chance-based defense is when you really need it to hold you up, it lets you down. 75% dodge chance is pretty good, but you still have a 25% chance to get one shot, which means I don't really think it's a good enough defensive layer to make up for the lack of other defensive layers. And then the 75% area damage reduction is something, but I don't really think it's going to move the needle. I think the 75% dodge chance is about as good as the 50% damage reduction from Caliban or Baruuk's passive, so I'll put it in B tier. Up next is Yreli. Have I told you that I love Yreli? Yreli's passive gives her 200% increased critical chance on her secondary weapon, as long as she has been moving for at least 1.5 seconds. She loses the buff if she stops moving for 1 second. The critical bonus works just like a crit mod. So Yreli's passive is definitely very good. It is the same as Nyx's passive, but it only works for secondary weapons. That being the case, I think it makes sense to put this a tier below Nyx's passive, which is A tier. Up next is Zephyr. Zephyr is less affected by gravity, making her fall slower and more maneuverable in the air. In addition, her equipped weapons gain 150% crit chance while in the air. This crit chance bonus works just like a crit mod. So it is 75% of Nyx's bonus, but it works in the air, which is basically always as Zephyr, and it works for all weapons, including melee, which is a big factor. A factor that will push it into S tier. Alright, now on to the Warframes that I accidentally skipped, starting with Jade. Jade technically has 2 passives according to the wiki, but I'm only really going to count one of them. The one I'm counting is she can equip 2 aura mods. The other one is her 1 and 4 can inflict judgment, but I think that's part of the abilities, not really a passive. Either way, aura mods are fairly strong, so being able to equip 2 of them is, well, fairly strong. And it gives you increased mod capacity, allowing you to build her easier and acquire less Forma. I think this passive easily fits into A tier. Alright, up next is Kume. Every minute, one of Kume's equipped weapons will inflict random status effects when dealing damage. So in addition to all the status effects that you would inflict with her 1 and 4, you also inflict random status effects with the passive buffed weapon. If you're running Condition Overload or Gun-Co on your weapons, which you should as Kume, then this bonus is pretty damn good. What I don't like about it is the swapping every minute thing. What it basically requires to use this passive at full capacity is for you to bring in 3 capable weapons. What I usually do is bring in 1 utility weapon, like the Praetos or the Grimoire, although I guess the Grimoire isn't very useful on Kume. Nevertheless, it's still kind of annoying for me. I think this is a fairly strong passive if utilized correctly and will land into A tier. Up next is Cyto 9. Cyto 9 gets 1% increased weak point critical chance up to 300 for every weak point kill, lasting the entirety of the mission. This crit chance bonus works just like a crit mod. So this is a ramping passive, which makes it kind of useless for any non-long mission. You can basically think of it as Molt Augmented for crit. 300% crit chance is a lot of crit chance, but it takes time to build it up. And let's be honest, does Sight really need that extra crit chance? Not really. Still, compared to other passives and even in a vacuum, this is a pretty strong passive, so I'll put it in A tier. And last, but definitely not least, Temple. Temple's passive gives them 50% increased ability efficiency when cast on the beat. Efficiency is a rare stat to get, so getting 50% for basically free as your passive is pretty good. It almost counters the entirety of Blind Rage's downside alone, allowing you to run Blind Rage for basically free. Definitely a very strong passive. It's not S tier, but it's definitely A tier. And that's it for the Warframe passive tier list ranking. This is quite the long video, but I mean, there's 60 Warframes, and I spent about a minute on almost all of them yapping about them, so it's gonna be long. Hope you guys don't mind. Let me know if you like these longer videos. I can make more of them. I definitely want to do this again, but for the abilities, so like ranking all the Warframe 1s, the 2s, the 3s, the ults, ranking all the subsumable abilities. So let me know if you want to see that. Make sure you leave the likes, the subscribes, hit the bell for notification, and I will see you in the next one.